Thank you, Mr. Weber. And the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start out by addressing air quality. And I have here the air quality section from a report done by the Alabama Policy Institute that shows that since 1980, our GDP has increased by 467%. Vehicle miles traveled up 94%. Population's grown by 38%. Energy consumption's up 22%. But emissions are down 50%. When you look at the air quality index and the percentage of days per year that the air quality index exceeded the standards, we went from about 24% in 1980 to about 2%. So there's no question that we have done an excellent job of improving air quality, yet the asthma rate has gone up. I think that's been mentioned several times. I'd also like to point out that there might be other factors that cause asthma rates to have gone up. And for instance, here's a report from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, in case someone wonders what the acronym is. It says asthma disproportionately affects low-income populations. And the percentages are astonishing, frankly, that it would have such a higher prevalence among low-income families when I think, and I'll ask my colleague from California, Mr. Knight, I believe that higher-income families breathe the same air as the low-income families. So just, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record the article and the section from the report on air quality. And also point out...
Without objection.
Thank you. As well that there is an estimate on what the new ozone regulations will cost. I find it interesting, Mr. Kerr, that the EPA seems to think that there's not going to be an impact. Is it possible, in your mind, just rationally thinking this through, that the additional regulations that are being imposed on businesses that are going to result in substantial job losses, that's going to result in less disposable household income, that will result in lower incomes, could have a more negative effect on health and well-being of people than any positive effect that additional regulations would impose, considering the improvements that we've made already?
I'll have to concede to the others because I don't do air quality consulting at all. I'm not involved.
My question is, do the people who work for the businesses of the United States and earn income do better in terms of health and well-being than people who have no income and no job?
Yes, sir, they do.
That's part of what I would consider common sense policy. In May of in a May 29, 2015 interview with PBS NewsHour, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy stated the following: "The farmers will know very clearly here we are clearly explaining that irrigation ditches are not included. We have clearly said in the rule, beyond this rule adds absolutely no regulatory or permitting issue to agriculture whatsoever." Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't. If I could get a chance to elaborate at some point, I'd like to give you time to ask your questions.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that as the last opportunity for you to speak. Mr. Kerr, former EPA Office of Water Deputy Administrator Nancy Stoner previously stated that the rule will not have a negative effect on small businesses. She said the agency sought early and wide input from small businesses while developing the proposed rule, including meetings as far back as 2011. Do you agree with this statement, that the rule will not have a negative impact on small businesses?
I disagree with the statement. I've talked to small home builders. It's already regulatory creep is already having an effect.
Well, that conclusion is consistent with what the National Federation of Independent Business concluded. They had a small business optimism index and found that small business owners attributed regulations as the single most important problem facing businesses today. So you said that you'd like to elaborate on something. You may do so.
Thank you. Two parts. When a farmer in Chesapeake is looking to sell his land and needs a wetland delineation done so that the prospective purchaser can determine where they can build, we are walking out into soybean fields and looking at areas that show up as moist signatures on aerial photographs and looking to see if there might be some wetland plants or stunted vegetation in a crop field. And the Corps of Engineers, before this rule, are regulating those areas as wetlands. Now, if they're isolated, then the federal government does not take jurisdiction, the Commonwealth of Virginia would. If they're adjacent to a ditch that's adjacent to a wetland, all of a sudden they are regulating them. Now, that has already crept into the procedure, and I've argued consistently that it shouldn't, because Congress went to the Corps back in 1990 and said, create what's called a PC cropland, a prior converted cropland. There was a regulatory guidance letter the Corps put out, 90-7, that spelled out the procedures for that exempted agricultural fields as long as they didn't pond or flood for 7 to 14 days. Any portions that did would be considered a farmed wetland and be regulated. In '93, the EPA and the Corps put out a rule that said we're codifying regulatory guidance letter 90-7. And you would think, I thought, I'm a consultant, I know 90-7. They said they codified it, which would have perpetuated this exemption for most farm fields that were farmed prior to '85, don't pond or flood for very long duration, and have never been abandoned for more than 5 years. With that rule in place, they're now telling me that what that actually means is that they don't recognize the prior converted cropland rule created by the NRCS under the Food Subsidy Act, and that the Corps doesn't recognize 90-7 anymore at all, anywhere, at any time. And I've repeatedly asked the question. Now, in the rule that's just been passed, they simply said, we're not changing that because that's not part of our charge. They changed adjacency definition. That wasn't part of their charge. I would love to see Congress, and to me there's no confusion. In fact, there's a court in Florida that's already decided this case, which I brought to the Corps' attention, which didn't get any traction. And that judge said you can have two different rules that use the same phrase and they mean two different things because they fall under two federal laws. That's not occurring. And we have farm ditches and farmland being regulated today, and it'll continue.
Mr. Chairman, just one last point. I want to point out that Dr. Philip Lloyd, former UN International Panel on Climate Change lead author, found that global temperature change over the last 100 years is well within the natural variability of the last 8,000 years. Standard deviation over the last 8,000 years is 0.98 degrees Celsius. I want to emphasize 0.98. And over the last 100 years, it's been 0.85 degrees Celsius.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. And if you would, give us a document to put in the record as well.